Harrison Whitmore could buy anything in the world except the one thing he desperately needed: someone who could handle his son. At 42 years old, Harrison had built a technology empire worth billions. He owned properties on 3 continents, drove cars that cost more than most houses, and had enough money to solve almost any problem. But money couldn't fix what was happening in his own home. His 7-year-old son, Tyler, had become impossible. That was the word the last nanny had used before she quit. Impossible. And she wasn't wrong. In the 18 months since Harrison's wife died in a car accident, Tyler had gone through 15 different nannies. 15. Some lasted a few weeks. Some barely made it through a single day. Each one had come with glowing references and confidence that they could handle any child. Each one had left defeated, frustrated, and sometimes physically hurt. The problems had started small after the funeral. Tyler stopped sleeping through the night. He refused to eat. He cried constantly. Harrison, drowning in his own grief, had hired the first nanny thinking professional help was the answer. But as weeks turned into months, Tyler's behavior got worse instead of better. The crying turned into screaming. The refusal to eat became throwing food across the room. And then came the violence. Tyler would bite, hard enough to leave marks. He'd kick and punch, aiming for wherever it would hurt most. He threw things, toys, books, plates, whatever he could grab. One nanny ended up with a black eye from a wooden block thrown with surprising accuracy for a 6-year-old. Another had her car keys flushed down the toilet along with her phone. A third was locked outside in the rain while Tyler watched from the window, laughing. The worst incident happened 3 weeks ago. Nanny number 14, a stern woman from England with 30 years of experience, had tried to put Tyler in timeout. He'd pushed her down the stairs. Thankfully, it was only 3 steps leading down to the sunken living room, and she wasn't seriously injured. But she'd gotten up, collected her things, and walked out without saying a single word to Harrison. Her lawyer sent a letter the next day. Harrison had consulted everyone he could think of: child psychologists who spoke in technical terms about trauma responses and attachment disorders, behavioral therapists who created elaborate reward systems that Tyler demolished within hours, a psychiatrist who suggested medication, which Harrison tried but stopped when it seemed to make Tyler even more withdrawn, support groups for grieving children that Tyler refused to attend, private schools that politely suggested he wasn't ready for their environment. Nothing worked. If anything, Tyler was getting worse. The child who used to climb into his father's lap for bedtime stories now flinched when Harrison tried to hug him. The boy who'd been curious and playful and full of laughter now spent most of his time alone in his room, emerging only to rage against whoever was trying to care for him that week. Harrison's business was suffering too. He couldn't focus during meetings. He'd leave the office early because the agency had called again. Another nanny had quit. His executive team was handling more and more without him, and while they were competent, Harrison knew he was losing his grip on the company he'd built from nothing. His board of directors were getting concerned. Investors were asking questions, but more than the business, more than the money, more than any of it, Harrison was terrified he was losing his son. That the bright, sweet boy Tyler had been before his mother died was gone forever, buried under all this anger and pain, and Harrison had no idea how to reach him. Every attempt to connect was met with violence or cold silence. Every "I love you" was ignored or met with "I hate you" screamed at full volume. The mansion that had once felt like a warm family home now felt like a prison. The staff walked on eggshells. The housekeepers had learned to stay out of Tyler's way. The cook made meals that often went uneaten. Even their dog, a gentle golden retriever named Buddy, avoided Tyler after being hit one too many times. Harrison sat in his home office at 2 a.m, unable to sleep, scrolling through yet another list of potential nannies his assistant had compiled. The requirements had changed over time. At first, he'd looked for people with impressive credentials, degrees in child development, certifications in special education, experience with difficult children. Now he was just looking for someone willing to try, someone who wouldn't quit at the first sign of trouble. His assistant, Patricia, had been with him for 15 years and had never failed at a task. But even she was struggling with this one. "The problem, Mr. Whitmore," she told him gently, "is that word has gotten around. The nanny community talks. Everyone knows about Tyler. Most agencies won't even take our calls anymore." That statement had hit Harrison like a punch to the gut. His son's reputation had spread throughout the professional childcare world. A 7-year-old child was being blacklisted. What kind of future could Tyler possibly have if this continued? Harrison knew he needed to make a change, but he didn't know what. He'd tried everything the experts suggested. He'd given Tyler space. He'd tried to enforce structure. He'd been gentle. He'd been firm. He'd tried talking about feelings, about his mother, about the accident. Tyler either shut down completely or exploded with rage. There seemed to be no middle ground, no way in. The following Monday, Patricia walked into his office with an unusual expression on her face. "I have a potential candidate," she said carefully, "but she's not what you're expecting." Harrison looked up from his computer, exhausted from another sleepless night. Tyler had screamed for 2 hours the evening before because Harrison had tried to turn off the television. "At this point, I don't even know what I'm expecting anymore." "What's her background?" Patricia hesitated. "She doesn't have formal credentials. No degree in child development. No certifications. But she comes highly recommended by someone whose opinion I trust, my sister's neighbor. This woman has raised 5 children of her own and helped raise many others in her community. She's worked as a caregiver and occasionally as a nanny, though never for families like yours." "Like mine?" Harrison asked, though he knew what Patricia meant. "Wealthy families. White families." "What's her name?" "Grace Thompson. She's 62 years old. She's worked mostly in housekeeping and elder care, but has extensive experience with children. My sister's neighbor says she has a gift with difficult kids, that she's patient, kind, but doesn't take any nonsense." Harrison rubbed his tired eyes. 62 was older than he'd considered. No formal training was concerning. But what did the formal training matter when every trained professional had failed? "Can she come for an interview?" "She can come tomorrow afternoon," Patricia said. "But Mr. Whitmore, I should mention. She's black. I only bring it up because I know some of your family members might have opinions about that." Harrison felt a flash of irritation, not at Patricia, but at the truth of what she was saying. His father, if he were still alive, would have had plenty to say. Some of his mother's friends would clutch their pearls, but Harrison's wife had been more progressive, had pushed him to examine his own biases and privileges. And right now he didn't care what color someone's skin was. He cared about finding someone who could help his son. "I don't care if she's purple," Harrison said bluntly. "If she can connect with Tyler, she's hired. Set it up." The next afternoon, Harrison was in his study when Patricia showed Grace Thompson in. She was a tall woman with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a simple navy dress and comfortable shoes. Her face was lined with age and experience, and her eyes were sharp but kind. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that Harrison noticed immediately. "Ms. Thompson, thank you for coming," Harrison said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I assume Patricia briefed you on the situation?" Grace sat down and folded her hands in her lap. "She told me about your son, about what he's been through and how he's been acting out. She told me you've tried everything and nothing's worked." "That's an accurate summary," Harrison admitted. He found himself studying her face, trying to gauge whether she would be any different from all the others. "Can I ask why you're interested in this position?" "I'm sure Patricia mentioned that it's been challenging." Grace smiled slightly. "Mr. Whitmore, I've raised 5 children of my own, 3 of them boys. I've worked with kids who've seen things no child should see, who've been through losses that would break grown adults. Challenging doesn't scare me. What breaks my heart is a child in pain with nobody who knows how to reach him." There was something about the way she said it. Direct. Honest, without any of the clinical distance the therapists had maintained. That made Harrison lean forward. "What makes you think you can reach him when 15 other caregivers couldn't?" "I don't think anything," Grace said plainly. "I don't know if I can help your boy. But I know that sometimes what a hurting child needs isn't someone with all the right degrees and methods. Sometimes they just need someone who's going to sit with them in their pain and not try to fix it too fast. Someone who's going to love them even when they're being unlovable." Harrison felt something shift in his chest. Love. None of the other nannies had talked about love. They'd talked about boundaries and consequences and behavioral modification. But not love. "Would you be willing to meet him?" Harrison asked. "Right now? I should warn you, he's had a particularly bad morning. The current nanny called in sick, probably never coming back, and Tyler's been alone in his room throwing things for the past hour." Grace stood up, smoothing her dress. "Let's go meet this boy." As they walked up the grand staircase toward Tyler's room, Harrison found himself hoping against hope that this would be different, that this woman, with her calm presence and her talk of love, might somehow be the answer to his desperate prayers. He couldn't take much more of watching his son suffer. He couldn't survive many more failures. They reached Tyler's door, which had several dents in it from being kicked and hit. Harrison knocked. "Tyler, someone's here to meet you." The response was immediate and hostile. "Go away, I hate you." Harrison's shoulders slumped, but Grace simply reached past him and opened the door. What happened next would change everything. The room was a disaster. Toys scattered everywhere, books torn and thrown, clothes pulled from drawers and strewn across the floor. In the middle of the chaos stood Tyler, a small 7-year-old boy with dark hair sticking up in all directions and tears streaming down his red face. His eyes were wild, angry, desperate. When he saw the stranger walking in behind his father, something flickered across his face. Maybe curiosity, maybe just preparation for a new target. Grace took one look around the room and let out a low whistle. "Well now, looks like a tornado came through here." Tyler's hands clenched into fists. Harrison tensed, ready to step between them if his son charged. This was usually when things went bad, when the new nanny tried to impose order, to lecture about behavior, to establish authority. Harrison had seen it 15 times before, but Grace didn't move toward Tyler or try to clean anything up. She just walked calmly to the window seat, pushed aside a pile of stuffed animals, and sat down like she had all the time in the world. "You must be Tyler, I'm Grace. I don't care who you are." Tyler screamed. "Get out of my room." "That's fair," Grace said mildly. "It is your room. But your daddy invited me in, so I'm going to sit here for just a minute if that's all right." Tyler grabbed the nearest object, a wooden toy car, the expensive kind from some fancy European toy store, and hurled it directly at Grace's head. Harrison started forward, but Grace held up one hand to stop him. The car hit the wall beside her with a loud thud. Grace picked the car up from where it had fallen, turning it over in her hands. "Nice throw, baby. Got a good arm on you. But if we're playing catch, you gotta warn me first so I can get my hands ready." Tyler stared at her, clearly confused. Every other nanny had either ducked and screamed or gotten stern and angry. This woman was acting like he'd just tossed her a ball in the backyard. His confusion made him angrier. "I'm not playing. I hate you. I hate everyone." "That's a lot of hating," Grace observed, still in that same calm tone. "Must be exhausting carrying all that around." "Shut up." Tyler swept his arm across his desk, sending pencils, papers, and a lamp crashing to the floor. The lamp shattered. Harrison flinched, but Grace didn't even blink. "Well, that's one way to redecorate," she said, looking at the broken lamp. "Was that one making you mad, or was it just in the way?" Tyler's mouth opened and closed. None of his usual tactics were working. The yelling wasn't making her scared. The throwing wasn't making her angry. The breaking things wasn't getting her to lecture him. He didn't know what to do with that. And then from somewhere deep inside, something unexpected happened. He laughed. It was short, surprised, almost shocked out of him, but it was a real laugh. Harrison stood frozen in the doorway, his heart pounding. He hadn't heard his son laugh in almost 2 years. Not since before the accident. Not since before everything fell apart. Grace smiled, a warm, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "There it is. I knew there was a real boy under all that mad." Tyler's face immediately hardened again, like he was angry at himself for letting that laugh escape. "I'm not mad. I'm... But he couldn't seem to find the words. His little face crumpled. And suddenly he wasn't the terrifying child who'd sent 15 nannies running. He was just a small lost boy who didn't know how to handle the enormous pain inside him. Grace stayed where she was, didn't rush to him or try to hug him. She just spoke softly. "It's okay to be mad, Tyler. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to feel all the big, scary feelings. Your mama died, and that's the worst thing that can happen to a kid. Of course you're mad about it." Tyler's whole body went rigid. "Don't talk about my mama." "All right," Grace said simply. "I won't then. Not until you're ready." For a long moment, nobody moved. Tyler stood in the middle of his destroyed room, chest heaving, fists still clenched. Grace sat on the window seat, patient and calm. Harrison stood in the doorway, barely breathing, afraid to break whatever was happening. Finally, Grace stood up slowly. "I'm going to go now, Tyler, but I'm going to come back tomorrow if that's okay with you. And maybe we can figure out something fun to do." "Do you like pancakes?" Tyler didn't answer, but he didn't scream either. Grace took that as permission to continue. I make real good pancakes. The kind with chocolate chips if you want them. Maybe tomorrow morning, if you're hungry, we can make some together. She walked toward the door, stopping next to Harrison. As she passed Tyler, she paused. Thank you for letting me visit your room, baby. Even if you didn't really want me here, you let me stay anyway. That was kind of brave. Tyler's eyes widened slightly. Brave. No one had called him brave in a long time. They called him difficult, troubled, impossible. But not brave. Grace left the room and Harrison followed, pulling the door closed behind them. They walked down the hallway in silence until they were out of earshot. Then Harrison turned to face her, his hands shaking slightly. How did you do that? He asked. What just happened in there? Grace looked at him thoughtfully. What happened is your boy tested me to see if I was going to react like everyone else does. When I didn't, when I just met him where he was without trying to change him or control him, he didn't know what to do with it. So for just a second his guard came down. He laughed, Harrison said, still amazed. He actually laughed. He did, Grace agreed. And that tells me the real Tyler is still in there, just buried under a whole mountain of hurt. The question is, Mr. Whitmore, are you willing to let me dig down to find him? Because it's not going to be quick, and it's not going to be easy, and it's definitely not going to be pretty. Harrison didn't even hesitate. Yes, whatever it takes. When can you start? I can move in tomorrow if you have space for me, Grace said. But I need to be clear about some things first. I'm not going to use timeout or punishment charts or any of that. I'm going to love that boy and set boundaries and let him feel what he needs to feel. I'm going to be consistent and patient, and I'm not going to quit when it gets hard. But you have to trust me, even when my methods don't look like what you're expecting. Done, Harrison said immediately. Whatever you need. Money isn't an issue. Grace held up her hand. I'm sure it's not. But this isn't about money, Mr. Whitmore. This is about that child in there who's drowning and doesn't know how to ask for help. We're going to throw him a lifeline, but he has to grab onto it himself. We can't force him. They discussed practical matters, salary, living arrangements, schedule. Grace would live in, take the guest suite on the same floor as Tyler's room. She'd be there full-time for at least the first month, then they'd reassess. Harrison agreed to everything without negotiation. He would have agreed to almost anything at this point. That evening, after Grace had left to pack her things, Harrison went back to Tyler's room. His son was sitting on his bed, surrounded by the mess, looking small and exhausted. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind only tiredness. The lady who was here? Tyler said quietly, not looking at his father. Is she coming back? Yes, Harrison said, leaning against the doorframe, maintaining the distance Tyler seemed to need. Her name is Grace, and she's going to be staying with us. She's going to help take care of you. I don't need taking care of, Tyler muttered, but it lacked his usual venom. Maybe not, Harrison said, but maybe she can be your friend. Would that be okay? Tyler shrugged, picking at a loose thread on his bedspread. She didn't get mad when I threw the car. No, she didn't. And she didn't cry like the other ones. No. Tyler was quiet for a moment. She said I was brave. Harrison felt his throat tighten. You are brave, buddy. You're the bravest person I know. Tyler finally looked up at his father, and for just a second, Harrison saw past the anger and the pain to the little boy who used to run into his arms after school, who used to beg for one more bedtime story, who used to laugh at terrible dad jokes. I miss Mama, Tyler whispered. It was the first time he'd said it out loud since the funeral. Harrison felt tears spring to his eyes. I miss her too, buddy. Every single day. Is that why you're always at work? Because it hurts too much to be here? The question hit Harrison like a physical blow. Out of the mouths of children came truth he hadn't wanted to face. Yeah, he admitted. Yeah, I think maybe it is. But that's not fair to you. You needed me here and I wasn't. I'm sorry, Tyler. Tyler didn't respond, just lay down on his bed and curled up into a ball. Harrison wanted to go to him, to hold him, to comfort him, but he knew Tyler wasn't ready for that yet. So he just said, I love you, buddy, no matter what, and quietly left the room. The next morning, Grace arrived at 7 with 2 suitcases and a box of cooking supplies. Harrison showed her to her room, helped her carry up her things, and then stood awkwardly in the hallway, not sure what to do next. Where's Tyler? Grace asked, setting down her bags. Still asleep, probably. He doesn't usually get up until 9 or 10. He doesn't sleep well at night, so mornings are rough. Grace nodded. All right. I'm going to go start on those pancakes I promised him. When he wakes up, he'll smell them cooking, and he can decide if he wants to come down or not. No pressure. Harrison watched her head down to the kitchen, this 62-year-old woman who'd walked into his disaster of a life and seemed completely unfazed by it. He wanted to believe she could really help Tyler. He wanted to hope that things could get better. But he'd hoped before, 15 times before, and every time he'd been disappointed still. There was something different about Grace. Maybe it was the way she'd stayed calm when Tyler threw things at her. Maybe it was the way she'd made him laugh after 2 years of anger. Maybe it was just that she seemed to genuinely care, not about the job or the money, but about the broken child upstairs. Around 8:30, Harrison heard footsteps on the stairs. He came out of his office to see Tyler, still in his pajamas, hair messy from sleep, standing at the top of the staircase. The boy was sniffing the air, clearly smelling the pancakes cooking. He looked uncertain, caught between hunger and his usual defiance. Grace is making breakfast, Harrison said gently. Chocolate chip pancakes, I think. Tyler didn't answer, but he also didn't go back to his room. After a long moment of internal debate, he slowly descended the stairs. Harrison followed at a distance, not wanting to push. In the kitchen, Grace was at the stove, humming to herself as she flipped pancakes. She looked over when Tyler appeared in the doorway. Good morning, baby. Sleep okay? Tyler shrugged. Grace didn't push for more. I'm making pancakes like I promised. Chocolate chip okay with you? Another shrug. Grace smiled. I'll take that as a yes. You want to help me flip the next one? Or you want to just watch for now? Tyler inched closer to the stove, curiosity overcoming caution. Watch, he said quietly. Watching works, Grace said. See, the trick is you wait until you see little bubbles all over the top, right there, see them? Then you know it's ready to flip. Tyler watched, fascinated despite himself. Grace expertly flipped the pancake, revealing a perfect golden brown surface. Want to try the next one? Tyler nodded. Grace handed him the spatula, then stood behind him, guiding his hand. Together, they flipped the pancake. It wasn't perfect, it folded a little, but Tyler had done it. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Harrison stood in the doorway watching this simple moment, his son helping cook pancakes with a woman they'd met yesterday, and felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. Real. Genuine hope that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. The first week with Grace was not smooth sailing. Tyler tested her constantly, the way a child pokes at a loose tooth to see if it still hurts. He threw tantrums that lasted for hours. He refused to get dressed, refused to eat, refused to do anything Grace asked. But unlike the previous nannies, Grace never lost her patience. She never yelled back, never threatened, never gave up. When Tyler screamed that he hated her and wished she would die, Grace simply said, I hear you, baby. You're real angry right now. That's okay. I'm going to sit right here until you're done. And she would sit sometimes on the floor outside his room, sometimes in a chair nearby, just being present without forcing anything. She'd hum old songs, spirituals from her childhood in Mississippi, melodies that somehow made the house feel less empty. When Tyler threw his dinner plate across the room, shattering it against the wall, Grace didn't scream or punish. She just got a broom and dustpan, cleaned it up, and said, That plate cost about $5. Breaking things when we're angry is expensive. Next time you feel like throwing something, come find me and I'll give you something that's okay to throw. Deal? Tyler had just glared at her, but the next time he felt that urge, he did come find her. She took him outside and gave him old ceramic pots to throw against the fence. He'd smashed 6 of them before his anger finally wore out. Grace had a gift for meeting Tyler exactly where he was emotionally. She didn't try to make him happy or force him to behave. She just accepted all of him, the anger, the sadness, the grief, the confusion. And slowly, very slowly, Tyler began to trust that maybe this adult wouldn't abandon him like everyone else had. By the second week, Tyler started following Grace around the house. Not close and not in a friendly way, more like he was studying her, trying to figure her out. Grace would work on household tasks, folding laundry, watering plants, preparing meals, and Tyler would hover in doorways watching. She'd talk to him whether he responded or not, telling stories about her own children, about growing up poor in the South, about her mama who'd raised 6 kids while working 3 jobs. My youngest boy, Jerome, he was a lot like you, Grace said one afternoon while mixing cornbread batter. Tyler was sitting at the kitchen table, coloring aggressively with markers, mad at the whole world for things that weren't his fault. His daddy left when he was 5 and Jerome just couldn't understand why. Thought it must be something he did wrong. Tyler's coloring slowed, but he didn't look up. What happened to him? He grew up to be a firefighter, Grace said, pouring batter into a pan. Saves people for a living now. But it took him a long time to figure out that just because someone leaves doesn't mean you're not worth staying for. Some people got their own problems that have nothing to do with you. Tyler was quiet for a long moment. My mama didn't leave. She died. That's true, Grace said gently. And that's different. But I bet sometimes it feels the same. Like she left you behind when you needed her. Like maybe if you'd been different or better, she'd still be here. Tyler's marker stopped moving completely. His eyes filled with tears. I was bad that morning, before the accident. I didn't want to wear the clothes she picked out, and we fought, and she was mad when she left. Maybe if I'd just worn the stupid shirt, she wouldn't have been upset. And maybe she would have been paying more attention, and maybe his voice broke. And suddenly this child who'd been angry for 2 years was sobbing, not just crying, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere ancient inside him. Grace immediately moved to him, pulling him into her arms. For once, Tyler didn't fight it. He just collapsed against her, letting out all the grief and guilt he'd been holding on to. Baby, listen to me, Grace said, rocking him gently. That accident was not your fault. Not even a little bit. Your mama loved you completely. Mad or not mad. Fight or not fight. What happened to her was terrible and random and unfair. But it wasn't because you didn't wear the right shirt. You understand me? Tyler couldn't speak, just sobbed harder. Grace held him and let him cry, not trying to stop the tears or make him feel better too quickly. Sometimes she knew the only way through pain was straight through the middle of it. You couldn't go around it or over it. You had to walk right through it and come out the other side. Harrison, who had been working in his office, heard the crying and came to the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway, watching Grace hold his son, watching Tyler finally release the grief he'd been carrying alone for so long. Harrison felt his own tears start. All this time, Tyler had been blaming himself for the accident. All this time, he'd been carrying that impossible weight. And Harrison hadn't known, hadn't asked, hadn't created the space for Tyler to share it. Grace looked up and saw Harrison. She gave him a small nod, inviting him closer. Harrison moved carefully to the table and sat down beside them. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and put his hand on Tyler's back. Tyler stiffened for a moment, then relaxed. Father and son sat there together, with Grace holding them both in her own way while Tyler cried out 2 years' worth of pain. After that day, something shifted. Tyler was still difficult, still had his moments, but the violent outbursts became less frequent. He started talking more, asking questions, engaging with the world around him instead of just raging against it. Grace introduced structure into his days, but not the rigid kind the other nannies had tried. It was a gentle rhythm. Wake up, have breakfast together, do some learning activities, play outside, help with lunch. Quiet time, more play, dinner, bath, stories, bed. The predictability seemed to comfort Tyler in a way punishment and threats never had. Grace taught him practical things too. How to fold his own clothes, how to wash dishes, how to make his bed. Simple tasks that gave him a sense of capability and control. She started a small herb garden by the kitchen door and gave Tyler responsibility for watering it every morning. Those herbs became his pride and joy. He'd check on them constantly, worry when they looked droopy, celebrate when they grew new leaves. One afternoon, about a month after Grace arrived, she was teaching Tyler how to make her grandmother's biscuits from scratch. His small hands were covered in flour, his tongue sticking out in concentration as he kneaded the dough like Grace had shown him. Harrison walked by and stopped, struck by the scene. His son looked happy, actually genuinely happy. Not the manic energy he'd had before the accident, but something calmer, more grounded. Can I help? Harrison asked tentatively. Tyler looked at Grace, who smiled and nodded. Sure, Mr. Whitmore, we could use another set of hands. Harrison washed up and joined them at the counter. Grace showed him how to cut the biscuits with a glass, how to place them just right on the baking sheet. The three of them worked together in comfortable silence, and Harrison realized this was what family was supposed to feel like. Not perfect, not fancy, just people caring for each other through simple shared tasks. Grace, Tyler said as they put the biscuits in the oven, can you tell me more about your mama? The one who had 6 kids? Grace smiled, wiping her floury hands on her apron. Well, my mama was the strongest woman I ever knew. She could carry 2 loads of laundry, referee 3 fighting children, and still have enough energy to sing us to sleep at night. She worked hard all her life, but she always said work was honorable no matter what kind of work it was. What kind of work did she do? Tyler asked, genuinely curious. She cleaned houses mostly, cooked for families who could afford help, took in ironing, whatever she could find to keep us fed and clothed. Grace paused, choosing her words carefully. Some people looked down on her because of that work, because of the color of her skin. But my mama held her head high. She said dignity comes from inside you, not from what other people think of you. Tyler thought about this. Did people look down on you too? Sometimes they did, Grace admitted. Sometimes they still do. But like my mama taught me, that's their problem, not mine. Harrison felt uncomfortable, aware that he existed in a world where people like Grace had to fight for basic dignity and respect. He'd never really thought about it before, too insulated by his wealth and privilege. But having Grace in his home listening to her stories was forcing him to see things he'd been blind to his whole life. Over the following weeks, Grace continued to share her life experiences with Tyler. She told him about growing up in Mississippi during segregation, about water fountains she wasn't allowed to drink from and schools she couldn't attend. But she also told him about her community, about how people looked out for each other, about church picnics and summer nights catching fireflies and neighbors who were more like family. She painted a picture of a life that was hard but rich in ways that had nothing to do with money. Tyler absorbed all of this like a sponge. He asked questions that sometimes made Harrison uncomfortable, questions about fairness and justice and why some people had so much while others had so little. Grace answered honestly but gently, never making Tyler feel guilty for his privilege but helping him understand it. See, baby, she explained one day while they worked in the garden together. Being born with money isn't bad. It's what you do with it that matters. You can use it to build walls between yourself and other people, or you can use it to build bridges. Your choice. Tyler was carefully watering his herbs, his small face serious. I want to build bridges. Then you will, Grace said confidently. You got a good heart under all that hurt. Just needed someone to help you find it again. Harrison watched from the window of his study, seeing his son kneeling in the dirt beside Grace, both of them tending the small garden. Tyler was transformed from the violent, angry child he'd been 2 months ago. He still had hard days, still had moments when the grief overwhelmed him. But now he had tools to handle it. He had Grace's calm presence, her wisdom, her unconditional acceptance. And slowly, he was letting his father back in too. One evening at dinner, the 3 of them eating together, something that had become routine, Tyler looked at Grace and said, I'm glad you came here. I'm glad you didn't leave like the others. Grace reached over and squeezed his hand. I told you, baby. I'm not going anywhere unless you want me to. And even then, I'm going to argue with you about it. Tyler smiled, that genuine smile that still surprised Harrison every time he saw it. Grace, can I ask you something? Always. Why didn't you get scared of me? When I threw things and yelled and was mean? Why didn't you quit? Grace set down her fork and looked at Tyler with complete attention. You want the honest truth? Tyler nodded. Because I saw a little boy who was hurting so bad he didn't know what else to do with all that pain except throw it at other people. I saw a child who needed love so desperately, but was too scared to ask for it because everyone he loved kept leaving. And I thought to myself, that boy needs someone who's going to stay, someone who's going to love him even when he's unlovable, someone who's not going anywhere. Grace paused. Plus, my own boys threw things at me plenty of times. You weren't the first child to test me, and you won't be the last. Tyler thought about this, then looked at his father. Dad didn't quit either. He could have sent me away to a school or something. Harrison felt his throat tighten. Never, buddy. You're my son. We're in this together, no matter what. Even when I'm bad? Especially then, Harrison said firmly. Though I'm learning from Grace that you're not bad. You were hurt. There's a big difference. Tyler looked between these 2 adults who'd stuck with him through his worst moments, who'd seen him at his absolute lowest and hadn't left. Something in his young face softened and he said quietly, I think I'm getting better. You are, baby, Grace assured him. You're doing the hard work of healing. That takes more courage than most adults have. As they finished dinner and cleaned up together another new routine, Harrison marveled at how far they'd come in just 2 months. His son was laughing again, talking again, connecting again. The mansion felt like a home instead of a mausoleum. And it was all because of this remarkable woman who'd walked into their lives and refused to give up on a child everyone else had labeled impossible. Grace was teaching them both what real strength looked like. Not control, not wealth, not power, just showing up day after day with patience and love and absolute refusal to abandon someone who needed you. It was a lesson Harrison had never learned in business school, but it was the most valuable one he'd ever received. 3 months into Grace's time with them, Harrison started noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. Small things at first. The way the household staff would stiffen slightly when he entered a room, as if preparing to be invisible. The way they called him Mr. Whitmore even though he'd told them dozens of times to use his first name. The way they seemed surprised when he said thank you, as if gratitude from him was unexpected. Grace had changed the atmosphere of the house just by being herself. She treated the other staff members as equals, not subordinates. She learned their names, asked about their families, brought them food when they looked tired. And slowly, the rigid formality that had always existed in the mansion began to soften. One afternoon, Harrison overheard Grace talking with Sylvia, the head housekeeper who'd been with the family for 12 years. They were in the kitchen and Grace was teaching Sylvia how to make her famous cornbread. You know, Sylvia was saying, I've worked for the Whitmores longer than anyone else on staff. But until you came, I never felt comfortable even sitting at this table. It was always, staff uses the back kitchen. Staff doesn't socialize in the main house. You've changed things. That's just foolishness, Grace said firmly. A person's a person, whether they're scrubbing floors or signing paychecks. We all deserve basic respect and dignity. Harrison had stood in the hallway feeling uncomfortable. Had he really created such a cold environment? He'd never thought of himself as cruel or dismissive. He'd paid everyone well, given them benefits, even Christmas bonuses. But he'd never really seen them as full people with lives and struggles beyond their work for him. That evening, he asked Grace about it. They were sitting in the living room after Tyler had gone to bed and Harrison brought up what he'd overheard. Was I really that bad? He asked. Did I really make people feel like they couldn't even sit at their own kitchen table? Grace looked at him thoughtfully, taking her time before answering. Mr. Whitmore, Harrison, please. Harrison, she corrected herself. I don't think you meant to be unkind. But there's a difference between not being cruel and actually being kind. You've lived your whole life at the top of a very tall ladder. You don't see what it looks like from the bottom because you've never been down there. Tell me, Harrison said. Help me understand, so Grace did. Over the next hour, she talked about her life experiences in a way she hadn't before. She told him about being turned down for jobs she was qualified for because of the color of her skin, about apartments she couldn't rent, loans she couldn't get, opportunities that were closed to her for reasons that had nothing to do with her abilities or character. She told him about being followed in stores, being assumed to be the help rather than a guest, being spoken to like she was stupid simply because of her accent. And the thing is, Grace said, I'm one of the lucky ones. I had a mama who taught me to hold my head high. I had a community that supported me. I had faith that sustained me. But I've watched people I love get crushed by a system that was designed to keep them at the bottom. Smart people, talented people, good people who never got the chances they deserved. Harrison felt something crack open inside him. He'd always considered himself liberal, open-minded, one of the good ones. But Grace was showing him how his good intentions meant nothing if he wasn't willing to actually examine his own behavior and beliefs. What should I do differently? You really want to know? Yes, Grace leaned forward. Start by actually seeing the people who work for you, not just as employees, but as whole human beings with dreams and struggles and families they're trying to support. Ask Sylvia how her daughter's doing in college. Ask Roberto about his son's baseball games. See them? Okay, Harrison said. What else? Look at what you're paying them. You think it's generous? And maybe compared to some wealthy families it is. But can they afford to live in the same zip code they work in? Can they save for retirement? Can they take a vacation without worrying about money? Real generosity isn't giving what feels like a lot to you. It's giving what makes an actual difference to them. Harrison thought about his own wealth, about how he could buy a new car without even checking the price. Meanwhile, his staff was probably counting every dollar. "I can fix that. I hope you will," Grace said. "But Harrison, this isn't just about money. It's about power and respect and dignity. It's about examining all the ways you've benefited from systems that hurt other people. That's uncomfortable work. Most folks with money never do it because it's easier to believe they earned everything they have all on their own." "I did work hard," Harrison said, feeling defensive despite himself. "I'm sure you did," Grace agreed. "But you also started on third base while a lot of folks are still trying to get up to bat. You had parents who could pay for the best schools. You had connections that opened doors. You had the safety net of family wealth if you failed. That doesn't mean your success isn't real. But it does mean you didn't do it entirely alone, no matter what you tell yourself." Harrison wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Everything Grace was saying was true. He'd had every advantage, and he'd never really acknowledged it before. He'd just thought of himself as someone who worked hard and got what he deserved. Tyler's transformation under Grace's care had already been humbling, showing Harrison how little he really knew about parenting or emotional intelligence. Now Grace was pushing him to grow in other ways too, to see his blind spots, to recognize his privilege, to understand that good intentions weren't enough. Over the following weeks, Harrison started making changes. He gave everyone on staff significant raises, not token increases, but meaningful ones that would actually change their quality of life. He asked Sylvia about her daughter and learned she was struggling to afford textbooks. He quietly set up a scholarship fund to cover it. He talked with Roberto about his son's baseball games and started attending them, cheering from the stands like any other parent. He learned their stories, their hopes, their challenges. The staff was suspicious at first, wondering if this was temporary or if Harrison would revert to his old distant behavior. But he kept showing up, kept asking questions, kept treating them like people who mattered. Slowly, the atmosphere in the house continued to shift. Tyler noticed these changes too. Grace made sure of it. She'd point out when Harrison did something thoughtful, when he showed respect to someone, when he acknowledged his own mistakes. She was teaching Tyler what good character looked like, not through lectures but through examples. One day, Tyler asked Grace a question that showed how much he'd been thinking about everything she'd taught him. "Grace, is it fair that we have all this money and this big house when other people don't have enough?" Grace and Tyler were working on a puzzle together in the playroom. She considered her answer carefully. "That's a big question, baby. What do you think?" "I don't think it's fair," Tyler said seriously. "But Dad works really hard for his money. So maybe he deserves it?" "Deserving is complicated," Grace said. "Your daddy does work hard, but lots of people work hard and never get wealthy. My mama worked 3 jobs and was still poor. Was she less deserving, or did she just not have the same opportunities?" Tyler thought about this, his small face scrunched in concentration. "So it's not about deserving. It's about luck?" "Partly," Grace agreed. "But here's what I think really matters. What do you do with what you have? Do you use it just for yourself, or do you use it to help other people too? Do you build walls between yourself and folks who have less, or do you build bridges?" "Bridges," Tyler said immediately. "I want to build bridges. But I'm only 7. What can I do?" Grace smiled. "You can start by treating everyone with kindness, no matter who they are or what they look like. You can share what you have. You can speak up when you see something that's not fair. And when you grow up, you can use your money and power to make things better for people who don't have those things." Tyler nodded slowly, then looked at Grace with those serious eyes that seemed too old for his age. "Grace, why do some people treat you different because you're black?" Harrison, who'd been passing by the playroom, stopped in the hallway. He'd been wondering when Tyler would ask this question, had been unsure how to answer it himself. He stayed quiet, listening. Grace didn't shy away from the question. "That's because of something called racism, baby. It's when people judge you or treat you badly because of the color of your skin. It's been going on for a very long time in this country, hundreds of years. And even though things are better now than they used to be, it's still a problem." "That's stupid," Tyler said bluntly. "Your skin color doesn't matter. You're the nicest person I know." "Thank you, baby. But to some folks it does matter. They've been taught to think that people who look like me are less than people who look like you. It's not true, but it's what they believe. And that belief hurts people. Has it hurt you?" Tyler asked quietly. "Yes," Grace said honestly. "Many times. But I don't let it make me bitter or mean. I just keep being myself and treating people right. And I trust that eventually love wins over hate." Tyler was quiet for a moment, Processing. If someone was mean to you because you're black, I would tell them to stop. Grace pulled him into a hug. I know you would. And that's exactly the kind of bridge building I'm talking about. Standing up for what's right even when it's hard. Harrison stepped into the doorway then, his eyes a little wet. Tyler's right, Grace. You're one of the best people I know. And I'm sorry if I've ever made you feel less than that. Grace looked up at him. You're learning, Harrison. That's what matters. None of us are born knowing this stuff. We have to be taught, and we have to be willing to listen even when it makes us uncomfortable. That evening, after Tyler was in bed, Harrison and Grace talked for hours. She told him more about her life, about her children and grandchildren, about the struggles and triumphs of her community. Harrison shared things too, about his own childhood, about the pressure to succeed, about how his wife's death had broken something in him that he was only now starting to repair. You know what I think? Grace said finally. I think Tyler getting so angry after his mama died was the best thing that could have happened to you. Harrison looked at her in surprise. How can you say that? Because it forced you to wake up. If Tyler had just been sad but manageable, you would have hired a regular nanny and kept living your life the same way. You would have thrown money at the problem and thought that was enough. But Tyler made that impossible. He broke through all your defenses and forced you to actually change, to actually show up as a father. And in the process, you're becoming a better person overall. Harrison thought about this. She was right, as usual. His son's pain had been the catalyst for his own transformation. I just wish it hadn't taken me so long. I wish I'd been better from the start. We all wish that, Grace said gently. But you can't change the past. You can only do better going forward. And you are doing better, Harrison. You really are. The next morning, Harrison called a meeting with all the household staff. He gathered them in the living room, something that had never happened before, and addressed them directly. I want to apologize, he said without preamble. I've spent years treating you all as invisible, as people who existed only to serve my needs. I never asked about your lives, your families, your dreams. I never really saw you as full human beings. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. The staff exchanged glances, uncertain how to respond. Harrison continued. Grace has been teaching both me and Tyler about respect and dignity and what it means to treat people right. I'm going to do better. I'm going to pay you all what you actually deserve. I'm going to see you, really see you, and if I slip back into old patterns, I want you to call me out on it. Will you do that? Sylvia, the head housekeeper, spoke up. Mr. Whitmore, that's very kind, but… Harrison, he corrected. Please, just Harrison. Sylvia smiled slightly. Harrison, thank you. This means a lot.